but that it was such a good idea. Incredible idea. But anywho, welcome, Doctor.
Hello.
So we a little bit going on, right? You got a. I hear you're just kind of vacationing and relaxing.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, definitely.
Most definitely. All right. So we did this because we did the show last week, and I had been contacted by a relative who was like, "Hey, do you have any recommendations for reusing PPE?" And we talked about it a little bit on air, and it was kind of one of those we weren't really all on the same page with how we could do it, if it was even possible. And luckily, people like you have already been in the process of thinking about this and going through this and disseminating or trying to comb through the massive amount of information in there. So you have, over the course of the past couple days, released a tremendous amount of information through the emergency response tips.
Free information.
Free.
Yes, we try to always release information free. Holding information hostage to people and making them pay for it is really inappropriate, especially in a time like this.
I agree. So
the nice thing is all of this data is old data. This is stuff that the U.S. government paid for in their research dollars over 10 years ago.
Wow.
And it's just because it's coming back around that it's another virus that we're able to pull upon the data from back in the H1N1 and the avian flu and the Ebola crises and say, you know what, we have the data to answer these questions today instead of having to wait.
Awesome. So let's then dive right into one of the first things, which is, holy crap, we weren't prepared for this, which is fine. A lot of people aren't. We're running really low on supplies. How can we maximize them? And you put out the white paper. Actually, it went out today, and you kind of categorized their PPE response plan into 3 separate phases. Can you describe that a little bit?
So we try to divide it out to 3 phases, which are the phase where all is well, the phase where everything in our supply line is perfect. We're getting our N95s, we're getting our P100 canisters. All of those things are great. And so that's phase 1.
Okay.
I believe most of us are beyond phase 1.
That has nothing to do with the number of patients that you have. That literally has to do with the supplies that are in the closet behind you.
It's your logistics supply chain.
Okay.
So for one department, their phase 1 may last a couple of months because they end up having this huge supply chain and they have materials in storage they can use that are still suitable. For another department, they may not have any N95s to start with, and they're starting right out in phase 2, which is when we're getting low on supplies.
Okay.
And we've got to think about reusing, which shouldn't be confused with phase 3, where, by God, we can't get anything.
Okay, so if we operate normally under phase 1, an AHJ, an authority having jurisdiction, whether you're a first responder, a hospital, anything along those lines, you have this down as respirators are running low. What would you say are the things that people are going to be like, holy crap, and what should they be starting to do if they're approaching that phase in order to be as safe as possible?
So, and I'm going to say that these are my personal opinions, although they are based upon data that is widely published from NIOSH and others in that area. So if I were a department and we were already getting low on our N95s, so let's say we had a stash that had only 1,000 N95s in storage, and we decided that, okay, we've already gone through half of our storage and we're only in the beginning of this event. What I would start doing is saying, okay, first off, can we use some medical masks? Do we have any on hand? Medical masks are not a respiratory protection device, but they can be used to keep your N95 clean so that you can extend its life. So by extending the life of the N95, and CDC goes into detail on this, it allows us more use, because generally if we're in phase 1, we use that N95, we visit and deal with the patient, we throw the N95 away. What I'm suggesting in phase 2 is that you cover the N95 with a medical mask, and then you throw the medical mask away after each patient interaction, but you save your N95.
Now,
Okay.
Now, hold on. Now, guys, just so we're all on the same page, because Mike and Dr. Christina can't see what I have up. I have the grid type document up. And just for the record, if you're watching this live, or if you're live, you can put in comments, and if there's something I could bring into the show, I will. But if you are afterwards, you can look into the show, notes section, and there is a link to the Google Drive folder, which has all these documents in there, in addition to Dr. Baxter's, which is emergencyresponse-tips.com, or at thehazmatguys.com. So you can get these documents in a multitude of places. But what they're looking at, guys, right now is that grid document, just so you guys know.
And that's what I call I call them quick reaction guides. There's a document that goes behind it that is like 6 pages, what will go into each of these different options and explain to you best practices to use. But this is the quick reaction guide.
Right. This is the full one. I'm just referencing up to the top. Balancing the risk, strategies for the respiratory protection. This is like the training wheels for what we're talking about.
Yes.
In the quick one. So we'll just keep the quick one up because it kind of summarizes all the stuff you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But guys, if you want to go see the full version, go to the other document. You can see all of it. So.
And so just for background purposes, what we're trying to do, and you can see, this is my company, Emergency Response Tips, and another guy that also works with the Hazmat Guys as well on some PPE things is Jeff Stoll from International Personnel Protection. And the two of us tried to get together and take the CDC guidance, which is really nice and well done for the medical community, and try to give it a little bit more oomph for the first responder community. And what we've done is take each of the CDC recommendations, divide them out, and then in the long document, we go through and link to you the scientific references behind each thing. So what do those scientific references provide to you? We also at the end provide a list of all those references. So if you want to get your geek on and really read deep into them, you're more than welcome to do that. And the references are linked there. And of course, being the queen geek that I am, I still have all of those here and I can share them as well. Now, but the papers are fantastic research done by NIOSH, some by AFRL, Air Force Research Laboratory, and just for years worth of really good data that we're now building on.
Now, I'll emphasize how important this is, maybe not necessarily as a firefighter or a boot level guy, but when you're a chief and you're faced with these decisions, papers like this, with what Dr. Baxter has put out, gives you the ability to make decisions and have backing so that if something were to happen later, you are at least showed that you did your due diligence and research, which can be sometimes a paralyzing thing when you're stuck making a decision and it could go sideways and now you're on the hook for it. So I highly recommend going through and looking at these. One of the things I saw, so when you were in phase 2 and the respirators are running low, the CDC has 2 different terms that I would like to look at and define real quick. They have a definition of extended use, and then they have a definition of reuse. And for extended use, they are literally referring to wearing the same N95 respirator for repeated close contact occurrences with several patients without removing the respirator. And reuse is referring to using the same respirator for multiple encounters, but with patients removing or donning and doffing with each encounter.
Yes. And as you can imagine, the extended use is much less harmful on the mask because you're not stretching out the elastics, you're not reapplying. If you're thinking about that filtering face respirator, you've got that metal clip that you put onto your nose and squeeze. As you take that on and off, you're obviously weakening the metal. As the foam that's underneath there, as you take it on and off, you're going to have different seating issues. And because the N95 or P100, whichever one you choose to wear, is very critical on how it fits against your face, when you take it on and off, you risk losing some of that protection factor.
Okay.
You see on social media these the doctors from Italy and stuff like that, and they're showing their faces, and they got the depression, the skin, like you can see how tight they have it on their face, which means I'm looking at that saying they've worn that mask for hours and hours. They haven't changed it, so they're adhering to what we're saying here. By not changing it over, you're actually doing it yourself a service rather than donning and doffing.
And think it through. When you're doing a filtering face mask, you actually are filtering out the particles in the air. And those particles are being filtered out in a couple of ways. One way is by size exclusion, using those different fibers that make up the mask. But the other way is by having an electrical charge on those fibers, which will then pull the particles to it. So the filter theoretically gets better with the length of time you wear it, in terms of as you get particles there, the size dimensions of the size exclusion get smaller and smaller, and you capture more and more particles. The unfortunate part of that is as you get more and more, your breathing resistance increases, and the work required for you to breathe through it becomes harder and harder. So you just end up saying, when you get to that discomfort point where it's really uncomfortable to wear the mask anymore, then you dispose of it and get a new one.
Okay. So now I'm okay. So your Bob's point, he was saying that the doctors, they're wearing it all the time. I get that. Now I'm trying to think of it. Okay, now I'm in my world, and my world is very much I'm at the firehouse. I get a run. I go on. If I'm low, say on N95 masks, I really don't have that option to be wearing that mask throughout the 24-hour, 48-hour, 92-hour period of my run. I am still okay taking that mask off and reusing it at another point, correct?
I'm perfectly comfortable doing that. Now, when I am doing that, I would require that you take that mask off and put it in a safe place. By a safe place, I mean some type of bag or something where it's labeled, number one, that it's your mask, because we don't want to share the mask between people, because as you can imagine, the inside of the mask has, all of your stuff on it.
Right. Which you don't necessarily know if you're contaminated or,
that's right,
pushing stuff. You can feel fine and still be contagious.
Absolutely. And there's other things besides just having this virus. So now when we look at that, you actually take it off and you don't put it into, let's say, a plastic bag, because remember we said it has an electric charge.
Yes.
And so if we took it and put it into a plastic bag, that charge can get drawn to the plastic. So for these types of filtering face piece respirators, we literally just take it off and put it in a paper bag or in a box or something where it's protected to not get squished and destroyed.
Right.
Okay.
And your name on it or something to minimize somebody else using yours.
And I believe, if I am correct, somewhere in here you mention taking off gloves, donning new gloves to take the face piece off, and using new gloves to put the face piece on, right? We don't want to use possibly contaminated hands in any way, and we don't want to possibly contaminate our hands in any way.
Exactly. As long as your glove supply supports it, then yes, replace your gloves to take your mask off and then throw those away. If your amount of gloves that you have in stock does not support that, because just as we're having issues with masks, we're having issues with gloves. So if we did have that issue with gloves, then you really want to wash your gloves. So wash your hands with your gloves on. If you're using the appropriate gloves, the water's not going to go through, the virus is not going to go through. They're actually tested for all of these things. And that was a different document we had put out before of what gloves to buy and which ones not.
Right.
And Bob has that one attached as well. But the issue there is wash your gloves, and if you need to, take that alcohol sanitizer on your gloves, put a little bit on there, try to destroy any virus that could be there, and then remove your mask.
Okay, let's say I'm a super germaphobe, and I'm like, well, screw the soap and water. Why don't I just pour bleach on my hand? Why don't I just use bleach to just clean my gloves and my mask and my face shields?
I actually have this up on the screen right now, so go ahead.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
That's awesome.
So which one do you have up there?
I have the part in the balancing the risk, the training wheels part with the hydroperoxide, microwave, and bleach.
Okay. So the only issue that I have with taking your gloves and putting them into bleach, especially at the percentages, if you're talking about bleach as you pour it out of a Clorox bottle, please don't do that. The gloves for examination gloves are not tested against that high of a concentration of bleach. While it's only 5 to 6%, it's still a hypochlorite, it's strong. So what we end up doing is taking like a half a cup of bleach per gallon of water. As we get down to that concentration, that allows us to use a level that is used in many EPA disinfection, approved disinfectants. Please do not confuse that with saying that this is an EPA registered approved process. This is not, unless you buy the exact ingredient with an EPA registration, because we're making this off the shelf does not make it registered.
And just for the record, I just read a actual incident report about poison control having to actually tell people, don't drink bleach to sanitize yourself on the inside. I don't think this has to be said, but I'm just going to say it again.
I will leave my Darwinistic comments to myself.
I'm just going to say it again. So,
do not drink disinfection products. They will not help you disinfect your insides.
No.
Okay.
They may clean completely out, but they will not disinfect.
Now, all right, so one of the things that I wanted to kind of go back and forth with and to clear up, because I was on the CDC's website, I was reading their information. They very clearly state, even in their reuse document, which you cited in your white paper, disregard N95 respirators during aerosolized generating procedures. If they're contaminated with blood, respiratory, or nasal secretions, or any bodily fluid, they're to be discarded.
Yes.
Discard the N95 following close contact with or exiting care of a patient co-infected with an infectious disease requiring contact precautions. So that would be like if somebody had tuberculosis.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a perfect example.
Okay. So there are definitely times that we want to throw away, even if we're in like a phase 3, we still want to listen to those recommendations?
I would say yes. And the real issue here is the bloodborne pathogens issue. We don't generally have a capability for the bloodborne pathogens not to get through some of these things. And so we really, once there's blood on there or heavy potential viral load, we want to get rid of that.
Okay. All right.
And that gets into, Mike, on the phase 2, what we call our last resort. Okay, so when I divided this out, it was, okay, what do I think is your best practice? Okay, what does CDC recommend on their highest thing? Okay. Then the minimum acceptable protection. Okay, what do we do when, it's a little bit iffy? Would we go P100 if we could? Absolutely. But we only have N95. We're going with that.
And just for everybody,
resort are those things that there is nothing else we can do at this point in time. So prior to going from phase 2 to phase 3, I like to start thinking about prioritizing who's going to have the exposure risk. And so in this case, from a firefighter perspective, when we send 5 people on an EMS call, there's generally 1 or 2 people that are working the patient. Those 2 hands-on with the patient are going to get the N95 or greater. The people that are handing equipment to the EMT or paramedic working the patient, okay, they're 3 to 6 feet away. They're going to get a medical mask. And then those people that are greater than 6 feet that are at the door that are really only there in case there needs to be help with a carry, those people aren't wearing a mask at all because they're 6 feet away. And if you have other victims or victims positives, you can ask them to leave the room. It's okay to say, you need to go into that other room and close the door and minimize your contact as much as possible.
Okay. Now, if you had, so that's the face piece and stuff like that. When you start to have things like cardiac arrests and you have paramedics that are possibly intubating, and I mean, they are getting up close and personal with some sticky, wet stuff that's not theirs.
Yes.
You're starting to really enter now the world of goggles and eye shields.
And eye shields.
And eye shields. Why the two? Why can't I just, why would I waste those resources in doubling up?
So there's research out there that shows that the face shields do not protect you from getting the particles into your eyes and nose.
Because it goes around.
Goes around it, right. So what we want to do is use that face shield against the face of droplets and larger splatters, per se. Use the goggles that are indirect venting or non-venting, and use those goggles to protect you. And as you get down to those levels where you have somebody wearing a medical mask instead of an N95, when we get into phase 3, then you really need to have that reusable and washable shield to make sure that we're protecting our people from that splatter and not holding it against their face.
Just a quick point while I'm looking at this grid type thing in the phase 2 and the last resort. I just kind of put it out to the people that you see walking around, if you were to venture out to, let's say, Best Buy or BJ's or some store, and you see people with their nail clinician face shield on, do they really need to wear it? And the answer is really no, because they're great. Unless you're going up to be within 3 to 6 feet of them, you really don't. That's why they keep saying social distancing of 6 feet. Get out there. And if you, there was a picture. It was kind of funny. The guy made like a cardboard disc that was 6 feet in diameter, and he wore it around town, and it was impressive of how far away 6 feet really is. So if you,
it's a long ways.
It is.
And 6 feet is the length, the distance that a cough will go. Right. If we were worrying about sneezing with this, we would probably be out closer to 12 feet.
Of course.
But because sneezing is not generally considered a symptom of the COVID-19 disease, then we can come in farther to 6 feet where dry cough is a symptom of. So as we get to that 6 feet, it's really important, because a dry cough, while you may not see it with the naked eye, the particles do come out, and so a lot of those particles that we care about are smaller than what we can visualize.
And they come out at a great speed. In fact, me and Mike, we didn't want to really drop it, but we are coming out with a 6-foot radius trainer, which we will sell for a nominal price with the suspenders.
Think of suspenders and a hula hoop.
And a hula hoop.
We like the Urkel.
Just brilliant, right?
From years ago.
I was testing it out today, but the problem is it's not collapsible, so I wasn't able to get through the supermarket checkout line. Yeah. I kept bouncing out. It was tough. It was tough.
Do you guys want to take one question real quick? It's a pretty good question. Sure. So I got a question here from Andy Bekowski. Is there any downfall for using Tyvek and SCBA if you got a ton of them, which is really where I am too, and you are a little bit light in the N95 realm? Is there a problem with going with that, I would say, market upgrade in PPE?
Yes. So is there a problem? I would say the only problem that you would have is the communication with the patient. Okay, so if the person with an SCBA on needs to communicate with a patient, it's very difficult to do that. Okay, you'll have limited visibility just from the SCBA mask, but will it provide you the protection? Oh, absolutely, 100 times. Well, actually, literally 100 times.
Yeah.
10,000 times fold, isn't it?
Yeah, 10,000.
So when we talk about protection factor, I believe we're talking about a protection factor of 10 when we're talking about the N95, and then we're talking about a protection factor of 10,000 with the SCBA. So yes, your SCBA is way over protection. Is it protection? Absolutely. Now the Tyvek suit, because it's not a suit that we generally would use for bloodborne pathogens, only because you can actually get the blood and materials will go through the Tyvek.
Through
But
the matrix of the Tyvek or through like a zipper?
Oh no, through the material.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's why we couldn't use Tyvek for Ebola, because it just goes through the material. It's not designed for that. Tychem now, which is a laminated Tyvek, like a Seranex, perfect. Nothing will go through it, but overkill still. But the reality of the matter here is we're only wearing the protective clothing as a means to keep any viral particles off of our clothing so that we don't get a touch and transfer to our eyes, nose, or mouth, or transfer to other people from our clothing. So the Tyvek itself, as long as you're not coming into direct contact with bloody sputum or something of that nature, perfectly. And frankly, consider reusing them if you can, because you're not going to have a full supply for a length of time.
If I were to have a Tychem with the attached gloves, which is very congruent with what is coming out now, are those? I understand, the medical field is not necessarily my expertise. I get the chemical protection. Is there a biological protection to those gloves, or should I be putting on gloves on top of that?
So reality is, just because of the situation we're in, I would put exam gloves over it, just because we can throw those away.
Okay.
And that's one less thing to worry about viral load. But the reality is that most of the gloves and things tested are tested against what we call the bacteriophage test. And that bacteriophage, I believe, is 27 or 29 nanometers in size. And the way that we do the test is that you have the glove, and the glove is inside out. You place the material inside of it, so it's on the outside of the glove, which is inside at this point. On the outside of the glove, which is the inside of the glove, you have this nutrient agar broth. And so you put the bacteriophage inside of there and see if any bacteria can transfer across it into the broth. It's a really hard test to pass because you've got this particle that's like 27 nanometers in size. And if there's any way to get through, it finds its way. That particle is smaller than the virus we're talking about. So any of those gloves, like an exam glove that passed NFPA testing for 1999 or any of that stuff, more than suitable for this, because it'll block out those particles. So now when you put that on and you want to reuse the suit for another time, what I say is take the suit, spray it completely. You've got, with your disinfectant from EPA, you allow it to sit with the contact time. So let's say we're using bleach as one example, and we use a half cup of bleach per gallon of water, and we spray that on the suit, and then we let it sit for 5 minutes, we rinse it off. Then we spray the inside of the suit as well in case we had cross-contamination. I put it inside out and let it hang inside out overnight to air out, get rid of the body funk, in case Mike wore it first.
Oh, that hurts.
Now we do the same spray, do the same rinse, let it sit overnight. Now you have the suit again, because it's not providing chemical protection for you. It's providing a barrier to minimize stuff depositing on your regular uniform.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So that's not necessarily a bad idea if you're running low on disposable PPE to go with something that's going to be a little bit.
Not a bad idea at all. And as long as you remember, this gear, once put on once, is no longer chemical protective gear. It is now a barrier material you're using for something else.
Right. And we, in the hazardous materials world, we're very familiar with this concept of a physical barrier, not necessarily a chemical or biological barrier, because we tell all of our operations level people that you can go perform a rescue in bunker gear that provides no chemical protection. It provides a physical barrier.
And so that's one of the questions I'm getting a lot from people is, can we wear our turnout gear? And while the answer is yes, you can, I would rather you used other sources first, because when you wash your turnout, when you get it on your turnout gear and need the viral load, you're going to need to wash it. And you're going to need to wash it at 140 degrees in the extractor. Okay? Temperature we use for extracting turnout gear, and you have to do that every time. So especially if you're a volunteer agency or an agency who doesn't have 2 sets of gear, that could become more cumbersome and create more of a logistics nightmare than is warranted.
I have another question, and probably the last question, and we'll wrap this thing up, is from JD Stafford. We are using SCBA masks with P100. Yeah, I like him. We're using SCBA masks with P100 filters and adapters. Can we disinfect the filter medium, not just the outside, with ClO2 or H2O2?
No.
I don't think so, right? That would be...
No. Well, first question, is JD online? If so, JD, respond to Bob on whether you're using a standard P100, which is just a filter, combination P100, which is like a organic vapor P100, or a CBRN canister with a P100, because any of those that have the carbon-based absorbent material, you cannot spray with any of those things. You're going to have problems.
Right, because the carbon has to be dry for the most part. I mean, it's going to get you huff in there, but nonetheless, it can't be deluged with stuff.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure ClO2 is
yeah, that's
really
chlorine dioxide. I don't think that's something
that really enjoys carbon.
It's great at really low levels as a disinfectant, but you definitely aren't spraying that on carbon. No.
All right, he says yes. There is a little bit of delay between what we're saying and what they're seeing. So
reality is then wipe down the outside of the canister with your disinfectant that you're using. Then store the canisters in between use in a humidity. So put it into a container or something where you can seal it in to minimize the air contact with the carbon, because that is what's going to give you your reduced time, is going to be the humidity being taken on to the carbon.
Okay, he says we have both. And one last question we'll take before we wrap this thing up. Keith Lowell says thoughts on UV sterilization and ozone generators for decon and ambulance decon.
So the issue that we've had with those is they're very directional. We've had a hard time with areas, so especially the UV. The UV disinfection is a fantastic disinfection procedure to follow up following a standard chemical one. My personal opinion, when you're dealing with ambulance decom, get yourself an electrostatic sprayer and spray an EPA registered disinfectant throughout the ambulance. That electrostatic sprayer will allow you to get complete coverage and will allow you to start wrapping around areas where you don't generally get a good coverage. So usually we find great coverage on flat surfaces, but in anything that's around corners, under crevices, that's where we end up having the live material.
And just for the record, with the ambulance decon, I don't think we have to say it, but again, take the medical equipment out first, open the compartments up, and let the thing do its thing.
Well, and also, when you bring the patient into the ER, open up all your ambulance doors and things, and if you leave them open for, like, I forget, I put it in the in one of the bigger documents, you can leave it open for, it's like, I think 40 minutes max will give you like a 95% air exchange and reduce your viral load just by using air. Then follow with cleaning any organic matter, because that will scavenge for most of your disinfectants. Then spray your disinfection solution. By using electrostatic sprayer, you get better coverage. There are great ones out there that are handheld. You won't get your hands on those anymore for right now because they're backlogged. But you can go to an auto supply paint store and you can get electrostatic sprayers for auto painting that plug in. And in this case, because you're not using it for like a hazmat decon, if you have to have it plugged in, so be it. So there's things that you can do that will allow you to get much better coverage. Stick to EPA registered disinfections. The one that we use most, there's two different ones for a lot of folks that got brew tab. Hey, use it up on this. So works great, EPA registered. If you have folks that have the chlorine dioxide tea bags, those are fantastic. You don't have to do any ProClean cells. Those you don't have to do any measuring. You just drop the tea bag into the right volume. So it's like, okay, this tea bag is for 5 gallons.
Perfect.
Boom, done. Let it sit. So I like those kind of solutions because I don't have to think. Just drop it in, done. And so those types of things are EPA registered. They're cheap, and they allow you to get a really good procedure done pretty quickly.
All right, before we kind of wrap this up, because we didn't get into phase 3, which hopefully nobody is there yet, but God forbid we actually start to enter phase 3, and we're talking about respirators, and you have a whole section on actually decontaminating respirators with hydrogen peroxide, microwave.
Yeah.
Am I reading that right? Like just
Yes.
pop it in the microwave with your popcorn?
Not with your popcorn and not your food microwave.
Okay, so talk
Like
to me.
Mark Better from Ohio, he went out and got a new microwave today, so they have theirs to build up. But there's been lots of research done over the years, and I actually funded a couple of them. But work by, if you look up a guy named Dennis Viscusi, and he is at NIOSH, and that's where all of that comes from. And so it's a project called Evaluation of 5 Decontamination Methods for Filtering Face Piece Respirators. So I chose a couple to put on there because they're more operationally relevant to us.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us don't have an ethylene oxide generator available to us in the field, so probably not what we're going to do. But in terms of bleach or microwave it for 2 minutes at 1100 watts, and that's a dry disinfection. Or you can use bleach where you soak it in bleach in the 1/2 cup to 1 gallon of water and let it sit for 5 to 10 minutes, then give it a good rinse, and then put, I don't know if you put it in front of fans or whatever to get more airflow through it. The reason you want that airflow is you don't want any of that hypochlorous material sitting in there, and then you get later, you breathe into it, you add some water, and you get a little bit of chlorine gas. Not a good day.
No, definitely not.
So the other one that I want to just touch for a minute, because I've seen this over and over on the news in the last, say, 36 hours. When the CDC released their guidance, at the very end of the guidance, it had a section that said about making your homemade respiratory products. That did not mean that that was the appropriate solution to our current problems. That meant if we cannot get a supply and say we're 3 months from now when there is absolutely nothing left, what they meant to say, what I am by reading it closely, it said that, there are other things out there, and when we get to the point where we have to use them, we're going to have to use them.
Okay,
but there has been research on those.
So I should keep the kids making the respirators to sell in the future.
Of course.
Sure. No, no. They're supposed to be homeschooling on things that are going to help them in the future, not you.
Yeah,
Yes, well, I mean, that it's for them.
But there's papers out there. And so what really comes down to is if you were using, I think the best commercial product was Hanes sweatshirts. So Hanes is going to make a killing on this if we ever go there. But Hanes sweatshirts ended up providing about the similar protection as a medical mask. So some of those lower end medical masks provide the same protection as putting a sweatshirt on. But what we never were able to test was in a system where they didn't have a good fit to the cheek. Because remember, we're doing lab scale tests here. So everything that gets around it. So even though it's going to provide you the medical mask protection, we're talking, if we had, I think it was 0.12% of the particles got through. So 0.12 for an N95. You were getting almost 90% of the particles through still with these homemades.
Okay, wow, that's a.
So the best was like 40% got through compared to 0.12 for your N95.
Not even the same.
Keep that in perspective. And if you do go this route and we haven't had any type of ability to look at those materials and say whether they will minimize absorption of the droplets and all that other lovely stuff coming towards your face, make sure you cover it with some type of reusable and cleanable face shield. So this, no, absolutely not. Nobody should be.
All right. Well,
all the other things in consideration first.
A couple of don'ts out there, people. Do not wrap the probie's head in saran wrap. That is not what she's talking about.
no.
Well, wait a minute. No, you can do that as long as at a certain point when he starts to turn blue, you just got to slit a little place near the nostril for him to get in air.
Right.
Oh, I was going to use a pencil.
Yeah.
Poke 2 holes. And a term that you mentioned quite a bit is viral load. And the date of this broadcast is 3/20/2020. And as of right now, there is no solid information on the actual viral load required to initiate infection, correct?
Right. As far as we can tell at this point in time, very small amounts of virus can initiate infection. So you're trying to minimize anything. And that's why we're using barrier clothing as well as respiratory.
Right. So, guys, we're going to wrap up this little show here. By all means, go to Dr. Baxter's website, emergencyresponse-tips.com. Go to thehazmatguys.com. You can check out the link in the section below here with all of the drive link, and you can get all these documents. Go to our website, her website, anyone's website, and get this stuff. Pass it out, because we are the people they are calling to find the information out, and we better have the good information. So keep coming to around here and checking this thing out. But thank you again, Dr. Baxter, for coming on. Mike,
Thanks, guys.
It was okay to see you.
Always a pleasure.
All right, we'll see you guys soon.